Hi, it's Rachel with Stirring the Deep. I've been diving into these concepts of this time period that was of death, but now we're moving into life. And those who are understanding this and grabbing a hold of it and wanting to move into life are starting that. Okay, and they are reaping in their life the fruit of living in life. Okay, the peace, the increasing love, the healing, the deliverance, the meaning. I mean, all these things, the value, the honor, all these things that you really desire. For those that are starting to move into that life and embrace it, that's what their lives are starting to reflect and to create, and that is their experience. Okay, so I'm talking about how you had this time of Adam and Eve where it was all life. Okay, and what were some of the elements that looked like? Where they ate the herbs of the field, all the animals did. They didn't eat each other. Okay, you saw where they walked with God, they had that unity, they had that oneness of flesh with each other. And then you saw after that fall, that time of like death really came in. So even when the earth was like cleansed with the flood of Noah, at the time of this period was still about death. That's why he said, now you eat of the animals, because it was symbolizing you're eating death. You're taking in death. Okay, because that's where you're at right now. And this was man's desire, okay? But this was something that we had to go through as a creation, because we had to learn to really desire to go God's way, and that be our choice. That's what we have to learn, the difference between life and death. And until you go through that experience, you don't really realize, okay, what it is. You don't understand. You don't understand mercy. You don't understand love. You don't understand righteousness. It's only by experiencing the other side. So to experience what truly is, you have to experience what it isn't. And that's what you see. But this was man's choice, man's desire. And you see how man desired that death, right? They went after it, and it's a lust that kept them attached to it. But it always creates cruelty, because it's death. So with Noah, right? So he had this, okay, now you're partaking of this death. This is the time of this world now. He still had the promise of life, and you saw that promise with the rainbow, okay? That this is what we're going through, but the end is that it will be life, okay? And to the really fullest, because you truly understand what that is. So in the death and in that whole thing, you had divorce. So the separation between the male and the female, because you had the separation from God. You had this partaking of animals. You had, there wasn't any love. You know, the commandments, you know, where the New Testament was love God, love others. And the Old Testament, it was just all these rules and regulations, because that love could not really exist, because you can't have love when you're separated from God. But this is the path that man chose, was death. And you see that because a lot of people are still choosing that. When they have another choice, they choose to partake of death. All right? And that's what I'm going to be showing here. So so the law and all that was to reveal the sin. Sin is going contrary to God's way. When you go to contrary to his way, this is what it creates. So when you see a truth and you're going against it, you're seeing what you're doing. All right, and so it created this great separation between mankind and between people. Everybody's separated. Remember when it talked in the New Testament of when you start coming together and being more of, you become of one spirit, because you're a pure love, you're pure truth, and truth is that narrow path. The lies abound and there are many, and all it creates, lies, pain, hurt, death, suffering, creates separation between people. Okay, that's all it creates. So people become very separated instead of abiding in harmony and peace and unity as they should. And you see that the ground was cursed. So instead of it being something that just blesses you, now you have the toil and the sweat and the work and the effort. These are all the ways of death. Okay? You see the animal sacrifices. And when you look into with the Israelites, when they came out of Egypt, and God gave them what? The bread of heaven, manna. And they complained. They didn't want that. They wanted meat. They wanted to partake of death. So what did God do? You haven't learned yet. So you know what? Partake of it, and hopefully you'll learn eventually of what partaking of death leads to. And it's interesting that they wanted that. They wanted to take part of death, and they didn't want the pure, beautiful, truth, spirit, life, the manna. They wanted death. And so after that, what do you see? Animal sacrifices. Because that's where they were. They were sacrificing constantly just themselves and others and all this stuff. And this is how they related to God. Because they were all in death. They were lusting in death. They were trapped in death. They were experiencing it and learning it ultimately so you could truly partake of the fullness of life. But that's why you see all that, because that's how even they connected to God was through death, because it's like you're in this whole world of death. So how do you connect to purity? It was through that death. Because when Christ came, he gave us the ability to connect to God through life, from inside out, life. But in the Old Testament, they didn't have that spirit. So they connected to God, it was just death. But that's why they could never really be in God's presence, right? But that was the only way they connect to him. So you just see how over and over you have all these different elements of death. And you see it in our world, okay? And it's on a very practical level. Like I said, people even are eating death carcasses of animals. And that's what that means, is that it's representing that you're still partaking of the pit, okay? But now what we need to be doing is partaking of life in every area. And so these things that Jesus spoke, like in Matthew 5, about, adultery of the heart, of the one flesh, the unity that you're to have with, between male and female, all these things, it's like he's saying, to be a part of the kingdom of heaven, it is this purity. So the kingdom of heaven is comes in you. That means you have to start abiding in that purity if you want to partake of it. You have to go back to the Garden of Eden, because he is the beginning and the end, and he's restoring it back to the Garden of Eden. That's why it's a new heavens and a new earth. It's a new Jerusalem. All this it's all been coated in death. And it all has to be purified and cleansed, and it's going to look just amazingly beautiful, because it's going to be of life. We haven't even seen what that is. And that's where I get talking into the complexities of our spirit, because all we've seen is death. But now it's like you're starting to see the light, as that light starts to grow up in you, and it's purging everything that's of death in your life. So you're no longer, and I really think that people that are going to start seeing this light, you can't partake of the death of animals, the carcasses, especially because if you're lusting after that, and the other side is cruelty, and that's what you see. As our lust grows, as that industry increases, the cruelty grows. It's because that's the way to maintain it. For as lust, that's the thing. Lust it's always increasing. And as it increases, the cruelty increases. And you can see that in the lust between men and women. You can see that in the lust in the food that you take. You can see that in if you're lusting after certain things, if it's money or power or status or control or whatever it is that the stronger that gets, the more cruel you're willing to be. Ultimately. Now, a lot of people like to turn a blind eye to that, but just if you don't want to look at it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay? So, but this is why this is so important. So if you want to be of life, you got to start partaking of the things of life in every area. You got to be aware of what you're bringing in. And if it's covered in death and harm, you got to stop taking that in. You got to be conscious of like every part of your life to be absorbing life and letting that death be purged, because that's how that kingdom of heaven comes in you and it grows, because it is bringing us back into that Garden of Eden state, that reconciliation with God, with one another. It's where it's all about love. Because when you have love, is the connection to life. Okay? Love manifests life. And the opposite side of love, like with lust is cruelty, love is just peace, and it's growth, and it's just blessing, and it is beautiful. And when you're abiding in that, you're abiding in life. So that's the choice that people have to make right now. You can either stay in debt, so that is to feed your lusts, okay? And the flip side is cruelty. Or you can start feasting and entering into life, which means you're starting to truly love without hypocrisy in everything that is of God. And the flip side is that you are growing so much in all the things of life, of peace and these beautiful things, and that's what's being created in your life and blessing. Those are the two choices. And it's amazing that it even is a choice, but that's just because we've been so blinded. People have been asleep, they've been dead. They have to be woken up to realize this is what's before you. And it's the time to partake of that bread of heaven, to stop desiring the meat in the wilderness, to have that unity, to love your enemies, not to destroy your enemies. It's this, Jesus overcame death. That's what he did. That's what we were in to learn, but he's like, I'm coming to bring you out of that. So that means you have to stop lusting after those things and feeding those lies, and that come from just a depraved mind that's been stuck in death. You no longer have to be there. That's the power of the Spirit of Christ, of grace and supplication that's being poured out, that is calling to people to come and partake, to come to that wedding feast, to partake of that life. Till next time, keep stirring the deep. It's the one thing that changes everything else.